I think the stream is live. I think we live. I think we are live. All right. Let me just make sure things are in order and we can get started with this stream. I'm really excited to talk about all this stuff. Just some things I gotta close out real fast and we should be good to go. Shrink this pup down. I wonder why I didn't do that with OBS. You know what? I don't even need OBS open like that. I can shrink this pup down too. All right. So, welcome. I'm going to be treating this stream like I always do, just like a monologue thing. And the thing about this stream is I'm gonna cut it up into two videos because we're talking about two different topics here. So I'm gonna break up. If you looked at the title, I'm gonna break up a shaman video, I'm gonna break up a warlock video, and release them. But if you catch me during a live stream, salute to you, and I welcome you. If you check this on a run back, thank you again in the future. One thing before I start, I do want to note that if I do sound a little funny, a little off, I'm fighting a sore throat right now. But, can't hold me down. We're going to get started anyway. So, yes, if you haven't been living under a rock, then you know that BlizzCon, well, today was the second day of BlizzCon, but BlizzCon is over, basically. And they had some really interesting announcements this year. One of the more exciting announcements, in my opinion, was the new Season of Mastery. Let me go ahead and scroll up right quick. You see right here, all runes discovered in Season of Mastery. And Season of Mastery is not Season of Mastery. Jesus, Season of Discovery. Season of Discovery is not going to be like Season of Mastery where they're just doing, little minimal changes here and there and changing, adding, this boss spawns a new ad or this does that. No, this is going to be some different stuff. And I'm really excited for it. Honestly, more so than I'm excited for Cataclysm Classic, which also got announced. And it makes me more excited for Wrath because Wrath was, even though they did do changes, I'm not going to say they didn't. They did do a lot of quality of life changes, which I think worked. Majority of Wrath was more the same, right? So I'm excited for something new, for something fresh, for something engaging. And being that a lot of new things got announced with Season of Discovery, like the new runes and being able to choose your roles differently and stuff like that, I think it's, time to talk about the new tanks that are coming in, namely the Warlocks and the Shamans. Now, I will say this, two things on this actually. Number one, Rogues also have the ability to tank. I'm going to put that in a separate video or stream because I still need to do a little bit more research on the Rogue tanking thing. I'm not that familiar with Rogues in general, so I want to familiarize myself with baseline Rogue and then, tanking stuff on Rogue. So there's that. Rogues do become tanks as well. I'm just cutting them out of this part of the stream. The second thing is all of these runes that you see on the screen here aren't all the runes that were announced. These are just things that came from the demo. In fact, I'm going to scroll back up real quick so you can see. Oh, by the way, if you're just joining in, thank you. We're going to be talking about Warlock and Shaman tanking. But yeah, these are just runes that came from the demo. This is not all of the runes that's going to be in the game. This is just what we saw yesterday. So keep that in mind. There's more to come. But for right now, I want to talk about what we have at hand because I feel like we got a lot of information at hand. I want to go over it. First, let's start with the Shaman, only because after looking at the Shaman, I feel like it's pretty clear cut how you're going to tank both with the rune usage and the talent points that you're going to take. So to start, I think the first rune that you're going to have to acquire before you can become a Shaman tank is the Way of the Earth rune. I'm going to highlight it right here. This makes a rock biter, and when you place it on your main hand, you deal 100% increased threat, you gain 30% health, and take 10% reduced damage. So this is basically giving you a tanking form, like a bear form, or a defensive stance, or like a blood presence, or frost presence, something like that. You also gain the crit immunity, the 6% crit immunity, and Earth Shock now becomes a taunt. However, it loses its range. It becomes a melee range ability instead of a ranged ability. Makes sense. I think all of the taunts in Vanilla Classic are in melee range. You can't like target and taunt something from 30 yards away like you can in Retail and ICC or Wrath. So keep that in mind. But Way of the Earth is definitely a mandatory rune if you plan on being a Shaman tank. Your second mandatory rune, in my opinion, is going to be Shield Mastery. That's up here. This is going to help you mitigate damage. Each time you block, you regenerate mana equal to 4% of your maximum health, and you gain armor equal to 30% of the shield's armor value. So that's really big. Like, there's really no other blocking mechanic in vanilla that works like this. Like, paladins don't have a block mechanic that gives them armor based off of their shield. Warriors don't have it. So this is actually unique only to shamans themselves, and I really like that. And not only that, it stacks 5 times. Now, if we're looking at this, that means that if both the armor from the shield and the mana amount stacks, that means you get a 20% mana every time you block, and you get 150% arm of your shield's armor. That's a lot of armor and a lot of mana. So this is going to drive your resource management and your defensiveness, because you're going to get a lot of armor, you're going to be blocking, things like that. It also always increases your chance to block by 10% flatly, and increases your block value by 15%. So to me, this is another mandatory tanking shaman rune that you need to have. Like, I don't think you can deviate. Now, the third slot, that's where you can kind of get a little bit of flexibility. In my opinion, there's 2 that I would highlight, one for dungeon running and one for raiding. The dungeon running one probably goes to Molten Blast. So blast enemies in a cone in front of you, dealing fire damage. This ability generates a high amount of threat, and Flame Shock's periodic damage has a 10% chance to reset Molten Blast. This is basically what you would use for AoE threat. This is like your Thunderclap, your Consecrate, but it's only a cone in front of you, so you got to aim it wisely. You can't be surrounded and have mobs behind you and expect to hit them with Molten Blast. But this is a good dungeon running thing. Threat is a big factor in vanilla, and I think this more or less is going to what drives shamans being a pretty decent dungeon running tank. Or, pardon me, I had to take a sip. Or if you're an off tank and you're tanking ads, this is another rune that you can kind of feed into to kind of make sure you have all the threat on the ads. Another thing that happens is Shield Mastery happens to be a really solid AoE tanking, multiple mob tanking tool, because the block is really good for tanking multiple things. Yeah, it's good for tanking, big boss hits and stuff like that, but the more attacks that you can block, the more useful block is. So I think that just further strengthens the Shield of Mastery rune. But Molten Blast is the third rune that I think is kind of a flip-flop. This is what I would use for dungeons and maybe ad tanking, off tanking, and raids, right? The next one, which I think will see more use in raids, is the Shamanistic Rage rune, and I'm going to highlight it right here. This basically gives you a defensive. So I highlighted too much. Hold on one second. So reduces all damage you take by 20%, and you regenerate mana equal every second for 15 seconds. A mana generated is equal to 15% of your attack power, 10% of your spell power, or 6% of your healing power, whichever value is greater. Really, this is just your defensive. Yes, the second benefit is getting mana back, but you're going to be getting so much mana from Shield of Mastery. I rarely think you're going to be using Shamanistic Rage for the mana effect, but it's there if you need it. But yeah, you really want it for the 20% DR, because shamans don't have an innate DR in vanilla, not to my knowledge. I know they have like Stoneclaw Totem that can taunt things off, and I think if you're talented, it gives you a shield or something like that, but they don't have like a shield wall. They don't have a bark skin, so they need something to actually allow them to tank things when things go awry, or when you're trying to stop a big magic hit. Like, that's what Shamanistic Rage comes in, and I think that's what's going to make it a pretty decent raid tanking rune. That being said, I think those are the only runes that I would say probably would be near mandatory for tanking. I definitely think Way of the Earth and Shield Master are mandatory. You can't tank without those 2 things, like especially Way of the Earth. Like you just don't have the innate tools. So Way of the Earth is definitely mandatory. Shield Master, you can call situational, but it's so good that I think it just makes it mandatory. Now, if these values stay the same, it's definitely going to be mandatory. I could see them nerfing the armor value, because getting 150% just of armor when you block is kind of nuts. So I could kind of see them changing the armor value, but as it stands right now, this is just too nutty to ignore, even if you're just boss tanking, right? But the other ones don't really, in my opinion, don't really lend themselves to shaman tanking. Like, obviously, you're not going to care about dual wielding, because you're going to have a one-hander and a shield equipped. You're not going to really need Healing Rain. Like, a lot of these things are like kind of gimmicky things. Like, you could have them. Like, you could get Earth Shield and put it on yourself, but it's like, would you really give up Earth Shield for like a defensive? Would you really give it up for Molten Blast? Like, I don't think you would. So, not saying that you couldn't, but I don't think you would. Like, another one that you can maybe think about is Water Shield, but again, if you have Water Shield up, you're trying to get mana back, and I think Shield Mastery just kind of covers the mana gain for you, so you don't really need Water Shield. But yeah, I think Shamanistic Rage, Way of Earth, Shield Mastery, and Molten Blast are the ones you're going to be in rotation for tanking. Now I want to dive ahead here. Let me shrink this down and go into the talents, because you got to remember, we're starting at level 25, so we don't have a lot of talents to work with. We don't have our full toolkit yet, so we're going to be talking about talents. And I want to say, I think for the first part, a lot of this stuff, if you read it, if you're a Shaman tank, right, and you read what the talents do, you pretty much understand what you need. So for the first part, we're going to go with Shield Specialization. I think that's a no-brainer. You max this pup out, and you get 5% increased shield block and 25% increased block value. This goes hand in hand with your Shield Mastery rune. And I think no matter what you pick, like talent-wise, you should always put 5 out of 5 in here. Now, the other ones are kind of flexible, kind of not, but I'm going to continue down the enhancement tree, and then we're going to reset, and I'm going to go do a different side thing. But as far as the enhancement tree is concerned, I think the most value you're going to get is out of getting Thundering Strikes and maxing that out. Now, you can go Guardian Totems, and you can go Improve Lightning Shield. I don't really like not Improve Lightning Shield. I don't really like Guardian Totems, because I feel like Stone Skin, while it does reduce the damage that you take, it will. I feel like you're probably going to have another Shaman, or you're probably going to have a Devotional, or you're probably going to have another, like, you don't need to waste talent point power here for such a minimal gain. You understand what I'm saying? So I think these talents can be allocated somewhere else. I skipped Ghost Wolf because you can't really Ghost Wolf indoors unless they change that. If they change that, the fact that you can Ghost Wolf indoors, then sure, Ghost Wolf might be a thing. But you can't really Ghost Wolf indoors, so having an instant Ghost Wolf doesn't really lend too much power in my opinion. You can take Improved Lightning Shield. I'll put some talents in there just to see the max value. You can take Improved Lightning Shield to make your Lightning Shield do more damage. That could be a little threat thing. I'm not mad at that. However, because we don't have a lot of talents to work with, I think I would forego getting the Improved Lightning Shield and go somewhere else. But you can opt to get that if you say, you know what, I don't really need the crit. I'd rather just have that constant Lightning Shield damage. That's not a bad trade-off. Like if you put 2 out of 5 in Thundering Strikes, get the 2% crit, and get the max value from Lightning Shield, that also might be a thing. My opinion, I think you are better off just getting the full 5% crit from Thundering Strikes. And then that leads us to the third row, which probably be the last row because we're already at 19 talent points. And remember, we're stopping at 25. So the tank in me, the safety tank in me, says go max out in Anticipation and just get that 5% dodge. However, until we see how hard some of these things are hitting, like how hard Black Fathom Depth bosses and trash are hitting, you might not need Anticipation. You might not need it. So that's kind of something that you got to have to gauge yourself, and your healers have to gauge, like, am I taking a lot of damage, so on and so forth. Now, I will say this, while gearing up, you're probably going to take Anticipation. Before you get pre-raid stuff, you're probably going to need it because you want to take as little damage as you possibly can. Pardon me. So yeah, you want to take as little damage as you possibly can. So I think Anticipation is just a good baseline talent all around, and we have 1 talent point left over. You have a couple options here. You can put it in two-hander. Again, that's not really for tanking though, so I would skip that. You could put it in Toughness to get 2% increased armor. You could put it in Flurry to get an attack speed increase on a critical, or you could put it in Enhancing Totems. I personally think the best option is either to go Enhancing Totems or to go Improve Lightning Shield. Now, you could be super safe, super defensive, and go for the 2% increased armor. Not saying it's not going to hurt, like, right? Having more armor just means you take less damage, so it doesn't hurt. However, again, for bang for your buck for talent point power, I think the best option is probably Enhancing Totems, with a second best being the Lightning Shield, because, again, threat is pretty important in vanilla. So sometimes when you're gearing up, when you're fighting earlier things or things that just don't hit that hard, you can kind of forego a little bit of that survivability for extra threat. And that leads me to the next thing of, once you get your pre-raid bits, and once you get some decent pieces, you can probably change out of Anticipation. Like, you don't have to max it out. You can, go 3 out of 5. You can go 3 out of 5 here, and then you can get maxed out Enhancing Totems, which not only makes you better, but it makes your party better. So I would say enhancing totems is always just going to be that next pick, but everyone to each his own. But yeah, you can go enhancing totems 2 out of 2, and then put the last point in a lightning shield. And now you have kind of a jack of all trades. You have a little bit of avoidance, you have a little bit of Thorn's ability to increase your threat, and you have the maxed out power of your strength of earth and grace of air totems. So that could also be a route. Again, I would forego toughness until you can really put talent points in it, because 2% or 4% armor doesn't really amount to too much later earlier on, because you're not really going to be having that much armor anyway. You understand what I'm saying? Like at low levels, especially at 25, where you can't really wear mail yet, you're still wearing leather. And unless you have a lot of leather pieces, or they implement new pieces where the leather gives a lot of bonus armor, toughness isn't going to go that far for you, because you're wearing leather, right? Leather already it has higher than cloth, but it's not mail, right? It's not mail, it's not plate. So you're increasing your armor value, and you already have low amounts of it. You're only increasing it by a little amount. So I think improving the totems, or maybe improving your lightning shield, or improving your avoidance is the best way. For me, though, I'm going to say I would do this. Just as I'm gearing up, I would go 5 in shield specialization, 5 in thundering strikes, 5 in anticipation, and then the last point in enhancing totems. This is one way you can build a shaman tank. Another way you can build, let me just reset it, is kind of if you want to go into the elemental tree. But I still say you definitely take shield specialization. Let's just keep that. I think no matter what, sub-spec you deviate into, shield spec is just the talent that you take at all times, in my opinion. I don't think there's anything in the resto tree that you're going to want, to be quite honest with you. And that makes sense, right? Like, because it's resto. So it doesn't really have a lot of tanking things to it. But I don't think there's anything really in the resto that you want. You could maybe argue for improve reincarnate, but you got to invest a lot of talents to get down here. So again, we're at 25. We really don't have the talent point economy to invest in there. So we're going to skip that. But if you want to go into the elemental tree, there is, I think, a niche thing that you could do for shaman tanking. And I would say go concussion. Now, you're not going to be using lightning bolt or chain lightning. I don't think so you will, unless there's a rune that makes one of these things instant, sure, or changes one of these spells to something else, by all means. But working with what we have right now, you're not going to probably be using lightning shield or not lightning shield, lightning bolt or chain lightning. But you do have earth shock, and concussion does increase the damage of shock spells as well. Earth shock is a shock spell, so you could take this for the 5% increase on earth shock. It is a taunt, so it's, it already gives you threat once you taunt something. So I guess if you just really want that extra damage, you could. So take concussion. But then when you go down into the second tier, I would say probably the most useful thing out of this tier is elemental warding. Reducing the damage you take from fire, frost, and nature effects by 10% is pretty major in my opinion. I think there's a lot of things, both dungeon-wise and in Black Fathom Depths, that do one of these schools of magic as damage. And 10% may not seem like a lot when you're taking small amounts of it, but as you get on, like, this could have niche benefits, whether you're boss tanking, whether you're ad tanking. Like, I think the first boss in Black Fathom Depths is a water elemental. Chances are he's probably going to do frost damage, so just taking flat 10% less is always good. And you're going to be taking 10% less by having the Wave of the Earth rune, and now you're taking 10% less from frost damage with elemental warding. I will say this though, I think investing 8 talent points just to get to this might not be the play, but if you have specific jobs, this could help out. So keep that in mind. And we still have 3 talent points left over. So if you really did go the elemental warding route, I don't think you need Earth Grasp. That's not going to really do much for you for tanking. And I don't really think you need Carve the Flames, because increasing your fire totem is great and all, but again, I don't really think it's going to help you tanking wise. I think you can invest these last 3 points. You could probably go, if you're already invested in damage with concussion, you probably just go all the way and go lightning shield. Just get the max value of lightning shield. You could go 3 out of 5 into, went too far. You could go 3 out of 5 into Thundering Strikes if you just want that flat crit, but at this point, I probably think it's just better to max out Lightning Shield at this point. But this is a build, I guess, if you really want to go into the elemental tree and get that concussion just for the elemental warding. It could be useful. It could be useful in some instances. So keep that in mind. But I think as something that I would be comfortable playing with, I think it would just be this. and put the last point there. And I will call it a day there. And that's really it for the shaman thing. Now, obviously, this is going to be subject to change because as the phases go on in Season of Discovery, we're going to get higher level caps. So you'll be able to, pardon me, you'll be able to go deeper into the enhancement tree. And you'll be able to get, actual talents like, you'll be able to get more toughness. You'll be able to get parry. You'll be able to get flurry, things like that. So as the level caps get higher, everything is subject to change. But I think for just what we have to work with right now, I think this is probably something that you're going to see or use within Season of Discovery when it launches. All right, now let's go to the Warlock. Let's go to the Warlock Runes. Here we go. And in my opinion, Warlock has more flexibility with their runes than Shaman does. Shaman's pretty rigid when it comes to Warlock, when it comes to their runes. When it comes to the Warlock runes, I feel like there's a lot more flexibility. So the first rune is probably the no-brainer, the one that you actually need to tank with, and that's Metamorphosis. Metamorphosis isn't like the cooldown version that you're used to in Wrath of the Lich King. It more so acts like a druid form, like it's like a bear form. Like, so once you press Metamorphosis, you won't leave Metamorphosis until you deactivate it. It's just going to always be a constant thing. And I really like that because obviously the aesthetic of Metamorphosis looks really cool. Like, you're a big purple demon with wings. Like, it looks cool. Like, meta looks really cool. So I like that fact. But let's see what it actually does. So you transform into a demon, increasing your armor by 500%. Now, this number might look really high. Like, that was a thing that a lot of my group chats and Discord discussions, they were like, oh, meta gets a 500 armor increase like that, it makes it better than everything else. Yes and no. It's this high because you got to remember, warlocks can still only wear cloth. And if you have a cloth item with 80 armor and you have a mail item with 300 armor, you're gonna need the extra armor boost somewhere. So instead of giving warlocks like kind of what shamans have, let me see where it's at. Yeah, shamans get a 30% health increase and a 10% damage reduction. Warlocks just get a massive ton of armor. So that's kind of like their tanking form. They also get the crit immunity, which pretty much every tank gets at this point. You get the 6% crit immunity, and your threat gets increased by 100%. It increases the mana you gain from life tap, and it changes some of your abilities. So let's look at it. So Searing Pain is now instant. So that just really boils down to Searing Pain being your single target threat nuke, right? That's the thing that you're going to be using when you're tanking like a boss and you just really need to maintain threat over it. So Searing Pain is going to be instant. Shadow Bolt now becomes Shadow Cleave, which acts as a shadow melee attack that hits 3 nearby enemies, has a 6-second cooldown. This is kind of like Bear Form Swipe. That's kind of what this reminds me of, except it has a cooldown. I don't think Swipe has a cooldown. So this is kind of like Swipe. Curse of Recklessness is now your taunt, and it has a melee range just like all taunts. Demon Charge is just the meta version of Warrior Charge. You charge and stun it for 1 second, cannot be used in combat. And Demonic Howl is kind of like Challenging Shout, where it's an AoE taunt. So just from this one rune, we get so much value. Whereas like the Shaman, you kind of needed Way of Earth and you needed Shield Master. You needed 2 runes to tank, whereas Warlocks really only need 1, and they kind of get like 85-90% of the tanking toolkit from 1 rune. So you're going to need Metamorphosis. Make sure you pick it up if you want to be a Warlock tank. Like, you legitimately cannot do it without it because you're just a regular Warlock. That's it. You're just a regular Warlock without Metamorphosis. So keep that in mind. The next rune, so before I go about the next rune, I want to say that I think the next 2 rune slots are very flexible dependent on where they end up on, which equipment slot they end up on, because that's pretty important. Like, I don't think Blizzard would put Way of Earth and Shield Mastery on the same equipment slot. That would be really troll if they did, because both of those things are really, really important. So I would be flabbergasted if they put Shield Mastery and Way of Earth on the same chest slot. That would be kind of ridiculous. And it's the same thing with the Warlock, right? Some of these things seem to have pretty good synergy, but it only works if they're on different runes. Now, I know these slots, this is what it was listed in the game. Some of these things obviously are subject to change, so that's why I really kind of didn't acknowledge it. Like, if you look at the Shamans, Wherever Earth is on legs, Shield Mastery is on chest. That could change. Who knows? I'm going to go with it right now because that's all we have to go off of. But obviously, things are subject to change. And I don't think Blizzard would troll us like that. Hopefully. But let's talk about the first rune that I think would be pretty decent. And that's the Master Channeler. So it basically turns your drain life into a 15-second dot. So your drain life no longer channels, lasts 15 seconds with a 15-second cooldown. So you should have 100% uptime unless you have the target change. It costs 100% more mana and heals you for 50% more each time it ticks. So it'll heal you for more every tick, 50% more, which I think is pretty decent. It's a nice little way to kind of keep your health up, give you a little bit of self-sustain. And I'm a Blood DK man. I like self-sustain. So I think this is a cool rune. The next rune we can talk about is the Soul Siphon rune. This is another one that just kind of gives you a little bit more self-sustain. It increases the amount of your drain life and drain soul by 6% for each shadow spell that you have, up to a maximum of 18%. Now, chances are you're probably not going to be channeling drain life, but if you have to, if you're range tanking something, like I know one of the bosses, there's a few bosses actually throughout vanilla that don't take physical damage that require a range tank. You can use something like Soul Siphon to help keep yourself up more easily. That's another one. Pardon me. I think one of the big ones that you're going to probably keep in heavy rotation is Demonic Grace. This goes on the leg slot, and this is Surge with Felt Energy, increasing you and your pet's dodge chance by 30% and increasing your chance to critically strike with all attacks by 305. Now, I think that's 30% as well. I think that 305 is a typo. I think that is supposed to be 30% because the percent is like when you hit shift 5, you get percent. So I'm pretty sure that's supposed to be a percent. So basically, you get 30% dodge, you get 30% crit, and lasts 6 seconds. I haven't seen this ability, but this to me feels like something that would be on like a 2 or 3 minute cooldown. Like this seems like a pretty lengthy cooldown, but it gives you 30% dodge. So this is like the big defensive that you would use when you're trying to avoid really strikes, because dodge doesn't really help you for magic. So this is something that you would use when you're trying to avoid strikes. And I think this would really work. This is a pretty good talent that, like I said, you're going to keep in high rotation. This works when you're mob tanking. This works when you're boss tanking, like when you just want to avoid big hits. So, and it gives you a little bit of a DPS increase as well, a little bit of a threat increase. So keep in mind for Demonic Grace, I think you're going to see this in rotation. And I think another one that I definitely want to talk about that you're probably going to keep in rotation. Unfortunately, they share the same slot as Demonic Grace, so you got to kind of pick your poison, but Demonic Pact. Now, chances are you're going to have a Warlock with Demonic Pact, right? You're going to have somebody who can bring Demonic Pact, and another Warlock is, in this case, what you're going to have. So you might not have to run this as the Warlock tank, but if you are the only Warlock, this is something that you probably would consider, because it's Demonic Pact. Like, it gives your party, just your party, not your raid. So this is not like Wrath Demonic Pact. This is, more akin to vanilla style things where a lot of buffs only affect the party, and you're going to probably have a lot of casters or healers, depending on your fight, wanting to be in your group. But your pet critical strikes apply Demonic Pact, and Demonic Pact increases the spell damage and healing of your party of your spell damage by 10% or 13, whichever is higher. So Demonic Pact is really important in Wrath if you've never played Wrath. It basically makes the entire raid better. It scales off of the Warlock's spell power. So the more spell power the Warlock has, the more spell power he's able to grant the raid. So that's why I think Demonic Pact is going to be big. Now, again, if you're Warlock tanking, you might not have to use this. But if you're not the only Warlock, but if you are the only Warlock, I would say this is probably something you want to keep just in the tuck, just in case you have an extra rune slot and you don't need Demonic Grace. Now, unfortunately, it does share a rune slot with Demonic Grace. That's unfortunate, but I guess it kind of would be kind of broken if you could have Demonic Grace and Demonic Pact at the same time. So I can understand why they would put those two things on the same slot, because it makes for compelling choices. And the last one I would say is more so a quality of life thing, but it's also on the leg slot. Blizzard put a lot of them like cool or important runes for Warlocks on the leg slot, and that's Everlasting Affliction. It basically makes your abilities refresh the duration of corruption back on its target. This really isn't a mandatory tanking rune, but I think it's something that just improves your quality of life. It allows you not to have to press corruption over and over and over, especially if you're not speccing into the improved corruption and making it instant and you're casting it. It makes your rotation that much cleaner, that much smoother. Going down to the other runes, I think things like Chaos Bolt and Shadow Bolt Volley would be okay, but you really don't want to be casting when it comes to tanking, because the minute you start casting, you cannot like more often than not. I don't know how it works in Classic, but I know in Wrath, when you're channeling, unless the ability specifically says you can still dodge and parry, you can't dodge or parry when you're casting something, because the idea is the focus is on the cast. So you're just making yourself susceptible to damage if you have to cast Chaos Bolt or if you have to cast Corruption, in this case when I was talking about Everlasting Affliction. Oh, by the way, if you're just joining, thank you for joining. I spoke about the Shaman one already. I'm going to break this video up, so it's going to be 2 separate videos, or break the stream up, my bad. But thank you for joining. If you're just stepping in, we're talking about Warlock Runes, and then after the runes, we're going to be talking about Warlock Talents. But I will be breaking up this Shaman portion in a separate video and the Warlock portion in a separate video. But anyway, back to this. You really don't want to be casting, so I don't really see using Chaos Bolt or using Haunt, especially if these 2 things aren't instant casts. Shadow Bolt Volley is an interesting one because when you have meta, your Shadow Bolt turns into Shadow Cleave. So I wonder if it changes this to, like, if this respects the Shadow Cleave change, because if it does, it just makes it so your Shadow Cleave will hit 5 targets at ranged versus 3 targets in melee, which can have its uses. And then the last one is Lake of Fire. Lake of Fire makes your Rain of Fire leave, basically a fire zone on the ground. Increases all fire damage you deal, and your demon pet deals by 40% for 15 seconds. This could be a really good ad pickup. Like, think of fights like Onyxia, where she's in her air phase and she's spawning whelps. You drop Rain of Fire, and now they're in Lake of Fire, and you're doing increased fire damage. Like, there's not a soul that's going to be able to pull threat off you. So, a lot of Warlock runes have their niches and their rotations. I would say like the only mainstay is Metamorphosis. The other ones can kind of be swapped in and out, especially because a lot of the important ones share slot locations, like Demonic Grace, Demonic Pact, and Everlasting Affliction share the leg slot. Master Channel and Lake of Fire share the chest slot. So a lot of the things share their slot, but as long as you have meta, like I said, you have like 90% of the tanking kit. Now you just need things to supplement it. So that being said, let's go to the talents. Talked about Shaman, let's go to the Warlock. And Warlock, just like with its runes, I think has some talent flexibility. I would say probably the one, maybe not the one that's mandatory, but one that you take more often than not, is the Demonic Embrace, which increases your stamina by 15%. It does lower your total spirit, but you don't really care about spirit because we have life tap. Not only do we have life tap, but taking the meta rune improves your life tap. So you're not going to be starving for mana, to be honest. So I think just increasing your stamina just makes you beefier. It makes, life tap doesn't hit as hard, because you remember life tap takes your health away. So when you're life tapping, healers aren't stressing out. And overall, just stamina as a tank is good. More stamina just means you're beefier. So I think Demonic Embrace is probably the one that you'll keep as a near mainstay. We won't say always, because obviously things change, but I would say a near mainstay for Warlock tanking is Demonic Embrace. The next one I would say is niche, but definitely useful, is the Improved Healthstone. So this is going to increase the amount of health restored by Healthstone by 20%. This is pretty good. Remember, we're still Warlocks. Even though we're tanking, we still have, Summon Soul Well. We still have the Warlock Toolkit. So don't be afraid to take things that buff that. I'm going to take the Teleports out of here, though, because I want to talk about the rest of the demonology tree. And until you really get to the latter parts, like until you get, Demonic Sacrifice and obviously Soul Link. Soul Link's going to be a really good tanking talent. Like, just being able to split 30% of the damage you take with a pet is going to be phenomenal. So I can't wait till we actually hit max in Season of Discovery and Warlocks are able to get Soul Link. That's going to be super important. But yeah, until you're able to get things like Soul Link and Demonic Sacrifice and things like that, the earlier demonology tree really is more akin to your pet. And your pet really isn't going to be doing the tanking. So like, let's look at the second row. The second row, first one is improved health funnel, increases the amount of health transferred to your pet by 20% when you max it out. Doesn't really help you when it comes to tanking, right? The next one is improved Void Walker. It basically increases the effectiveness of all of your Void Walker's abilities, which is cool. Like maybe if you're not a tanking Warlock, but this doesn't really help you when you're tanking. And the same thing for Felt Intellect, which increases the maximum mana of all your pets. Cool talent for solo stuff and regular Warlocking, but not really good for when you're tanking. Same thing for the third tier too. Like increasing the health of your pets doesn't really help you as a tank. Being able to summon your pet faster doesn't really help you until you get Soul Link. Then yeah, if your pet dies, you're gonna want to have access to summoning him faster. And same thing for improved Succubus or improved Syad. Like increasing the effectiveness of your pets doesn't really help you when you're the one taking the brunt of the damage and you're tanking. So I would say you can forego the rest of the demonology tree for the level 25 cap because there are other things that we can get that I personally think is going to help you tank even more. The first thing is going into the affliction tree. Now you have two options here. You can have improved corruption, which when maxed out just makes your corruption an instant cast, or you have suppression, which reduces the chance for enemies to resist your affliction spells by 2%. Me personally, I would say you probably go suppression. Now, I will say this. Because Searing Pain and Shadow Bolt, which gets turned into Shadow Cleave, are destruction spells, suppression doesn't affect those. However, it does affect Curse of Recklessness, which is an affliction spell. That's going to be your taunt. And one thing you know about, if you know about vanilla, you don't want taunts to miss. So having a free 10% chance of your taunts not to be resisted is pretty important, in my opinion. Some people may feel differently. Some people may say you don't need the full 10%. You can live with like maybe 2 out of 5, or maybe even 3 out of 5, get the 6%, and then the rest you can just chalk up to having hit gear on. Which that's a fair point. I'm not going to say that's wrong. I think early on though, when you're gearing up, like when you're doing pre-raid, you're probably going to max out suppression just to make sure your taunts land. And then once you have gear, once you have hit gear, you can kind of reduce this down and put the points elsewhere. If you want a faster corruption, you can, so on and so forth. But I think for pre-raid stuff, I think you go max out suppression. And then the next row, we have, so you can ignore improved Drain Soul, right? So basically, when you kill something while you drain soul, it gives you a lot of mana back. We have life tap. We don't really care. And we have an improved life tap. Not the talent, but the actual life tap that comes with the Metamorphosis rune. So you don't really need improved drain soul. So we can kind of just X that one out quickly. Improved life tap can be useful. Again, because we're using the Metamorphosis rune, we have already an improved life tap. How much improved it is, I have no idea. I didn't get a chance to play the demo. Only time will tell once we're able to get our hands on it. But I would probably say there's no reason to really triple down on having the meta version of life tap and this improved life tap. I feel like that's like, you put a hat on a hat. You don't really need it. So I would say you could probably skip improved life tap. Now, if you're fighting something, let's say like Searing Pain could have a astronomical mana cost, then sure. If things have crazy mana cost and you find yourself life tapping frequently, then I would say improved life tap would earn its point. But as of right now, I just don't have the information to say that I would take improved life tap. Improved drain life is different though. So remember, we have that talent option or that rune option of Master Channeler that turns drain life into a dot that heals you, and it heals you for 50% more every time it ticks. Maxing out drain life gives you an extra 10% of that. So improved drain life just directly increases your self-sustain, which is pretty decent as a tank. 1 second. So improved drain life is the first talent on the second tier that I would consider. The next one, and remember, we only have 25 points to work with. Not 25 points, but we only have up to level 25. So we only have but so many talent points to work with. You only have 1 point left. And I would say the best use of that point is going into Amplify Curse. Now, Amplify Curse is a 3-minute cooldown. It's not a real cooldown. Like it never was like super impactful for Warlocks because they were just casting Shadow Bolts anyway. But for tanking, it's a little bit different. So with Amplify Curse, it increases the effectiveness of your Curse of Weakness, your Curse of Agony by 50%, or your Curse of Exhaustion by 20%. And the point that you want to look at is the curse of weakness. Increasing the effectiveness of curse of weakness by 50% means that you'll just take less damage because your curse of weakness will just reduce that much more damage taken. So you can kind of look at Amplify Curse as kind of, I wouldn't say micro because it is a 3-minute cooldown. You can kind of look at it as a defensive cooldown because it'll empower your next Curse of Weakness, which will reduce the damage that the boss deals or whatever mob you're tanking deals, which in turn will reduce the damage that you take. So you can kind of look at it like that. However, if you don't want Amplify Curse, you could go into just the regular old improved Curse of Weakness and just give it a flat 6% effectiveness increase at all times. This also could be a viable option. However, I would say if you're raid tanking, if you're boss tanking, which it kind of seems like that's what the Warlock tank is supposed to be, because a lot of their toolkit is mirrored from the Druid tanks, and Druids are really good single target threat generators, and it kind of looks like that's what Warlock is going to be, save for having things like Lake of Fire. I feel like that's going to be a big AoE thing, but it kind of feels like Warlocks are kind of akin to Druid tanking. So in my opinion, having the extra cooldown here works better for the kit of the Warlock. Now, this is just one way to build. You don't really need to take improved Drain Life all the way. However, I don't really think there are better options as of right now. We can go into the destruction tree. I'll talk about some things in there, but I think for the most part, this is kind of what you're looking at in a pre-raid setup. Once you get gear, once we see all the runes, obviously, options change, talent points change, this, that, and the third. But for what we have currently, I think this is probably the best option that you got for Warlock tanking. But I want to go into the destruction tree. So we clear that out. I still think, again, 15% increased stamina is a mainstay. I don't think you get rid of that. Going into the destruction tree, we kind of have to think about how some of these talents are going to interact with the spells. So looking at the first thing, we have Improved Shadow Bolt or we have Cataclysm. Reducing the mana cost of your destruction spell. So again, it's going to reduce the mana cost of Searing Pain. It's going to reduce the mana cost, or it should reduce the mana cost of Shadow Cleave, which comes from Shadow Bolt, and Searing Pain. However, I don't think you take this one. We have Life Tap. We shouldn't really need Cataclysm. So that leads us to go into Improved Shadow Bolt. So Shadow Bolt critical strikes increase the shadow damage dealt to the target by 20% until 4 non-periodic sources are applied, right? Now, if this works with Shadow Cleave, then this is great, right? This is great. However, I think this gets diminished because Shadow Cleave is a 6-second cooldown. So you can't really use it every GCD like you can with Searing Pain. And chances are, even though we only got one 10-man raid announced, in a larger scale raid, in a 20 or a 40, you're probably not going to be the only Warlock. So you probably don't really need this one. So in this case, if you are the only Warlock in the 10-man, maybe Improved Shadow Bolt works, especially if it transitions to Shadow Cleave. But I don't know how much uptime you're going to get on it if it's a 6-second cooldown. So it might be if you get a crit every time you hit it, sure, but I don't know how much value you're going to get out of Shadow Cleave, but that's one you could take. You could go into improved, or not improved, but you could go into Cataclysm and just reduce the mana cost of your destruction spells. You're probably going to be spamming Searing Pain, so reducing the mana cost by 5% doesn't hurt. So I would say that's not a horrible talent. Neither one of these are pretty bad. We just have to see how they work. The next row is you have Bane or you have Aftermath. So Aftermath gives your destruction spells if you max it out, a 10% chance to daze the target for 5 seconds. I think this is pretty powerful given the fact that you're going to be using Searing Pain a lot. Now, this daze effect, more than likely, I'm 99% sure, will not work on bosses. It'll work on like maybe lieutenant mobs and some other ads, but it will not work on bosses. But just having a 10% chance to slow something for 50%, it's not bad. And then the next one we have is Bane. See, Bane would have to change though, because when we max out Bane, it reduces the cast time of your Shadow Bolt and Immolate spell. Now, Immolate will still have, but Shadow Bolt is Shadow Cleave, which is an instant melee ability. So you really don't need Bane. Like, they would have to change what Bane does or make a separate part of it to work with Shadow Cleave. Maybe instead of reducing the cast time, it reduces the cooldown from 6 seconds to like 4 seconds or something like that. So maybe that's what they could do with Bane. But as of right now, as it stands, Bane doesn't really do too much for you. So I would say you can skip Bane and just go straight into Aftermath. And then we come back and we only have that 1 point left over, and we have these options to take. You can get improved Firebolt, which increases the Imp's Firebolt, which I don't know how I feel about. Like, you could take it, like, especially like it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt anything, right? Your Imp's gonna be there. Having to cast more Firebolts doesn't hurt anything. So I guess you could take that. You can have improved Lash of Pain. Same thing. It just improves the ability of your Succubus Lash of Pain. Again, I don't even know if you get Succubus at level 25. I'd have to check that. But if you do, I guess you could use this. Devastation increases the critical strike chance of your destruction spells by 1%. This is probably something that you take, given the fact that you're probably going to be using Searing Pain a lot. So having a 1% increased critical strike chance, especially at low levels, like 1% is a lot at low levels. So I think Devastation more often than not is probably going to be the one that you take. But you also have Shadow Burn. So it instantly blasts the target for shadow damage. If the target dies, you get a Soul Shard. This, to me, isn't as good as Destruction, just giving a 1% crit chance on your Searing Pain or your Shadow Cleave. But it's there if you're ad tanking or you're dungeon grinding and you need some soul shards, right? You don't want to drain life. You don't want to drain soul on them. So Shadowburn can be a good shard generator and a good instant nuke for ads if you're ad tanking, something like that. But I think with your last talent point, more often than not, you probably pick one of these three. And for me, I would pick either improved Firebolt on the Imp or the 1% crit on the destruction spells. And that would put you at your 25. Let me just take a drink of water. And I think that rounds out basically what a Warlock tank spec would look like on both sides. So you have the destruction side you can lean into, or you have the affliction side, which I'm going to go through again, which you could lean into. And I think this is more often than not what you'd probably see at a level 25. Like once the guides start coming out, more often than not, it's probably what you're going to see. Now, me personally, I don't see much of reasons to go deeper into the demonology tree, given the fact that a lot of the tier 2 and the tier 3 and even like the tier 4, all of these are just like pet talents. And until we see more runes, and maybe some of those runes will affect the pet in ways where you want to use these as a Warlock tank, until we see more, I personally think as is, you don't really need to take any of these talents. So I think it just behooves you to go into either the affliction tree or the destruction tree. But who knows? Only time will tell. But I think for the most part, Warlocks and Shamans are going to be really popular. Like people have been wanting those two specs to be tanks for a long time. I think especially like the Shaman, because the Shaman just has a lot of the innate talents that tanks need. They have shield specialization. They have the armor talent. They have a parry talent. Like they have things that they have anticipation, which is like the avoidance talent. They have so many talents dedicated to reducing damage or avoiding damage that it was kind of unfair for Blizzard not to give them a proper tank role. So I'm glad to see it come to fruition, and I think it's gonna be fun. I think if I had to just like kind of spitball it, like do like an improv like tier list, just based off of what we've seen so far, I still think Warriors are probably going to be number one as the tank role. I think there's definitely a lot more stiff competition now. Don't get me wrong. Like Warriors, if Warriors are the best, they're not the best by a very far margin at all. And even with some of the runes that I've just seen, like I think the Paladin now comes up really, really closely, to be quite honest with you. I think the Warlock tank and the Shaman tank have their niches. Like if you look at the toolkits that the Shaman tank has, if you look at a lot of their runes, they're the block tanks, right? So they're going to be really good at taking a lot of mobs. So they're definitely going to be great in dungeons. They're definitely going to be great on fights where like Onyxia, where you have a lot of whelps tanking, or like Uberus, Upper Blackrock Spire, where you going through the whelps and stuff like that. They're really going to be good at mob tanking. So any kind of encounter where you're tanking a lot of mobs, I think Shaman's going to excel just by virtue of them being able to block a lot. They're going to get a lot of armor thanks to their Shield Master rune from blocking. They're going to have that Molten Blast rune that's just going to make them do a lot of damage in a cone. Like Shaman tanking is going to be fun. I think Warlock tanking is going to be a really good competitor for boss tanking because they have a really huge armor value, 500% increase. Even on the cloth gear, that's a lot of armor. And I do want to show you something real quick. Let me just see if I can find it. It was from yesterday, from one of the previews that they had shown about Classic. I just gotta find out which link it was. I should have prepped this sooner, but I'm pretty sure it's one of these. Not this one. It's from it is from the Black Fathom D. Oh, is it this one? Let's find out. Yes, perfect. All right. So this is just some of the gear, like a sneak peek, as you can see, of the gear that they have. Look at this. Clam Weave Tunic. It's a cloth item with 130 armor. That is a lot of armor for a cloth item. And with the Metamorphosis multiplier, the 500%, that's a lot of armor. They might as well be wearing mail at that point. So if you have items like that, like this cloth item with a big armor modifier like that, and look, it has its armor, agility, stamina, intellect. This is basically everything that a warlock would want as a tank. Like this is a lot of stats for the warlock tank, and I think items like this is what's going to help drive warlock tanking. Like high armor, high stamina, a little bit of avoidance from the agility, a little bit of intellect, just to fuel your mana pool and your damaging abilities. So with items like this, it makes me very, very hopeful for Season of Discovery. I think Blizzard is doing the right thing, and I cannot wait for it. You know, it comes out in a little, like 3 weeks? Let me just double check real quick. Today's the 4th. So yeah, it comes out the last week of November. So a little more than 3 weeks, but I cannot wait. I'll probably do, if not another video, another stream on the rogue tanking, because like I said this in the beginning of the video, I want to explore rogue tanking, but I want to look at the rogue toolkit innately because I'm still not that familiar with vanilla rogue. So there could be things that I miss in the talent tree or things that I miss in the ability list that I don't want to overlook. So I want to just look at the rogue toolkit innately, and then we can explore the runes and stuff like that, and we can really build up a proper rogue like tank, like a proper rogue rune choice and talent point choice. So that's what I want to do with the rogue tanking. And I'm not afraid to look at any other roles or classes. Like we can look at DPS, we can look at healing, but I do want to start with the tanks because I'm a tank guy. I like tanking. For the most part, I tank on most of the MMOs or games or anything. I always, try to take that tank or guardian role, and then I deviate out later. But that's really it. If you join me for this stream, I thank you so much. Like I said before, I'm going to break this up into 2 videos. Hopefully I can do this properly. But I'm going to break it up as a shaman video and a warlock video, and I can just post whether so this way you don't have to sit through the whole stream. If you just want to see shaman, or you just want to see warlocks, or you just want to see the rune section, or you just want to see the talent point section, I'll have it divided up for you. But that being said, guys, you guys know the drill. You've been great. I've been Soul, and I'm out. Peace. Oh, one more thing I do want to say. I said this in the beginning of the video, but I might as well say it at the end. I apologize if I sound a little funny. I'm still fighting a sore throat, so I apologize about that. But I tried my best. I have my water bottle here trying to keep my throat up to speed. But yeah, I'm going to edit this. I'm going to put it up right now. So if you missed it or you're just joining, thank you. Hope you catch it on the run back. And that's it for the stream, guys. Peace.